Calvatone, northern Italy. This is the site of the old Roman village of Bedriacum. Hi, I'm Adam Morand. In 69 AD, two separate battles would take place here, at Bedriacum, between three men fighting to become Emperor of Rome. The empire was once again in a state of civil war in the latest round of internal conflict. For roughly the last 150 years or so, Rome has been stricken with relatively constant infighting and struggle that would bring the final collapse of the old republic and bring rise to an empire. Now, you'll get to witness the various battles and conflicts that took place in the waning days of the Republic and during the turmoil of the First Imperial Dynastic transition in the Year of the Four Emperors. See the vast numbers of soldiers, their formations, and the context and history of the engagements. Now, on Decisive Era. To fully see how Rome was once again plunged into turmoil, we must go back over 150 years before Bedriacum to Rome's first real civil war in 88 BCE between Lucius Cornelius Sulla and Gaius Marius. Marius was an experienced general who had gained prominence in his campaigns in Africa and during the Social War. He was also famous for his military reforms that allowed non-property owning Romans to join the military, allowing it to become a career rather than a duty. Sulla was also a great general who would also fight in the Social War and in Africa, and in 88 BCE he would be given the consulship. But mobs supporting Marius forced him to flee to Greece, where he would gather his army and entered Rome by force, and force Marius into exile. As Sulla returned to the east on campaign, the Senate would turn on him, granting consulships to Marius and his ally Cinna in 87 BCE. But Marius would die less than 3 weeks into his consulship, and Cinna would later be killed by mutinous soldiers, prompting Sulla to once again return to Rome. In 83 BCE, Sulla would once again march on Rome, defeating Marius the Younger and the rest of his supporters by 80 BCE. He'd be reinstated as dictator of Rome and execute most of his enemies, but his reign would be short-lived, as he would resign the following year. After Sulla's resignation from the dictatorship, the Roman Republic would seemingly be spared for the time being. Over a decade later, the Republic would avoid another potential disaster in 63 BCE, as Cicero would foil the Catiline conspiracy, resulting in the execution of most of the conspirators. For the time being, it seemed the Roman Republic would be spared, but another conflict was already brewing. By 60 BCE, the Firsttriumvirate would be formed between three of the most powerful men in Rome: Julius Caesar, Pompeius Magnus, and Licinius Crassus. The three would use their power and influence to circumvent various constitutional and senatorial obstacles. Crassus was the richest man in Rome, who would also gain military prominence in his victory against Spartacus. Pompey was considered to be the greatest general in Rome at the time, for his various victories in Iberia and in the east against Mithridates and the Cilician pirates. Caesar, on the other hand, was a young and rising commander. He would be given command in Gaul, where he'd fight for many years, defeating various tribes and bringing Roman rule. Disaster would strike the Firsttriumvirate, as Caesar's daughter Julia, who was married to Pompey, would die in 54 BCE. Even worse, Crassus would be decisively defeated by the Parthians at Carrhae in 53 BCE, resulting in his death. This would officially end the Firsttriumvirate, leaving only Caesar and Pompey to face each other. Caesar's many victories in Gaul had made him extraordinarily popular, especially with his soldiers and the people. This would prompt Pompey to oppose Caesar in the Senate, resulting in them becoming rivals. By 49 BCE, Caesar had conquered all of Gaul, but he refused to release his legions, and the Senate declared him an enemy of Rome. Rather than surrender, he took the 13th Legion and marched it into Italy. Caesar was loved by his soldiers, and they were willing to do almost anything for him. In 49 BCE, this loyalty would be displayed as Caesar would lead the 13th Legion over the Rubicon into Italy. This would catch Pompey and the Senate completely off guard, as they had no legions to defend Rome. They would abandon the city to Caesar, retreating south and eventually to Greece. A 4-year civil war would begin, as Caesar would follow Pompey into Greece. Pompey would initially seem to have the upper hand once he had gathered his legions. But in 48 BCE, they would meet at Pharsalus. Both Caesar and Pompey would bring roughly 8 legions to bear against one another. But Caesar's legions were severely under strength, and he only had 22,000 men and 1,000 cavalry. Against him, Pompey's full-strength legion of 36,000 legionaries and 7,000 cavalry. Pompey would organize his legions in a traditional triple-line Roman formation, but Caesar would have to stretch his men thin in order to match the full length of Pompey's army. He'd also create a 4th line in hopes of countering Pompey's overwhelming cavalry number. There was a large distance between the two armies, and Pompey would hold his position, ordering his men not to advance. This would force Caesar to charge on Pompey. As the battle would begin, Pompey's overwhelming cavalry numbers would push back Caesar's cavalry. But then, Caesar's 4th line would hold the cavalry at bay, and in fact force them to rout. Caesar's remaining cavalry would flank around Pompey's army, and his battle-hardened veterans would break Pompey's left wing, which would flee the battle, causing mass panic. Caesar would win a great victory and take very few casualties. Caesar would pursue Pompey to Egypt, but when he got there, he would find that he was already dead. At Pharsalus, Pompey would be decisively defeated by Caesar, and he would barely escape with his life. He would attempt to flee to Egypt, but as he arrived, he'd be executed under orders of Ptolemy XIII. To Ptolemy's surprise, this would deeply anger Caesar, and in fact, he would aid the Queen Cleopatra in her civil war against him. After his stay in Egypt, Caesar would continue his campaigns against the remaining Pompeians, defeating Scipio at the Battle of Thapsus in North Africa in 46 BCE. Caesar would become dictator for life, but he was extremely lenient to most of his enemies. However, this may have resulted in his downfall, as in 44 BCE, he would be assassinated, and one of the conspirators would be his forgiven friend, Brutus. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, had hoped to liberate the Republic, but to their surprise, they had only enraged the people, as well as Caesar's adopted son and heir, Octavian, and his friend and general, Mark Antony. Brutus and Cassius would flee to the east, but they would be given time, as initially, Mark Antony and Octavian would turn against one another. However, the two would reunite along with Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate, as reports of Brutus and Cassius's growing number of legions came in. In 42 BCE, the triumvirs under Octavian and Mark Antony would face off against the liberators led by Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. As many as 200,000 men would fight to decide the final fate of the old Roman Republic. The two massive armies would collide. Antony would face off against Cassius, and Octavian would face off against Brutus. Octavian's legions would be pushed back by Brutus, but on the other side, Antony would push back Cassius. And upon hearing a false report that Brutus had been defeated, Cassius would commit suicide. Brutus was able to rally Cassius's legions before chaos could ensue, and an orderly retreat was maintained. On October 23rd, the two armies would once again face off against each other. Brutus's attack was repulsed, resulting in a terrible slaughter. Thousands would die, and most of his men would rout in confusion. As Octavian and Antony's forces neared Brutus's camp, He would retreat with his remaining legions to nearby hills, but after realizing that victory was impossible, he would commit suicide. The liberators had been decisively defeated at Philippi, with the remaining republicans being relegated to Sicily and the surrounding waters. The last remaining republicans, led by Sextus Pompeius, the son of Pompey, would be defeated by 36 BCE, as Lepidus and Octavian would lead their forces into Sicily. The following year, Sextus would be captured and executed, officially ending Republican resistance. The new triumvirate would now control Rome, but the peace would not last long, as Lepidus would be pushed out of the alliance, and Octavian and Antony would renew their former conflict. With Mark Antony in the east and Octavian in the west, the last civil war of the Roman Republic would begin in 32 BCE. Octavian had been looking for an excuse to declare war on Antony, and would use Antony's affair with Cleopatra to fuel a propaganda campaign against him. Along with this, Octavian would illegally seize Antony's will, reading it to the Senate and accusing him of anti-Roman sentiment. Octavian urged the Senate to declare war on Cleopatra, as he knew Antony would come to her aid. When he did, the Senate stripped Antony of all of his power and labeled him a traitor to Rome. Both Octavian and Antony would raise their legions, each mustering over 200,000 men. In 31 BCE, Octavian and Antony would meet at Actium in a massive naval battle. Over 700 ships would be involved, and Antony would personally lead his fleet into battle. However, he would be defeated by Octavian's forces and forced to retreat. Antony would retreat to North Africa, leaving a majority of his legions stuck in Greece without supplies, where they would surrender soon after. The legions Antony hoped to raise in North Africa had switched sides and joined Octavian, forcing him to retreat to Egypt. Antony would gather his last remaining 30,000 men and attempt to defeat the traitors, but his army was destroyed, and he was forced once again to retreat to Egypt before Octavian arrived to besiege Alexandria. Realizing the situation was hopeless, Antony would commit suicide in August of 30 BCE. Not soon after, Cleopatra would also commit suicide after a failed attempt to surrender. After Actium and the suicide of Antony and Cleopatra, there was no one left to stand in Octavian's way. He became master of Rome and proclaimed Augustus, and he became the first emperor of the new Roman Empire. As the sole ruler of Rome, Augustus would transform the old republic into the Roman Empire by 27 BCE. At long last, relative peace and stability were brought to Rome, but this would not last long, as Augustus's heirs were not as capable as he was at managing the empire. Tiberius would be unpopular with the Senate, and his heir, Caligula, would go mad and be assassinated. After that, Claudius would be murdered by poison in October of 54 AD, potentially by his wife, Agrippina. His heir Nero would become the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Nero would become extremely unpopular, characterized as being extraordinarily cruel. He would put almost all of his enemies to death, including his mother. Over 13 years into his reign, he would be declared an enemy of Rome and replaced by Emperor Galba, and in 68 AD, he would commit suicide. A new round of Roman civil war would emerge, known as the Year of the Four Emperors. The legions of Germania would revolt, declaring Vitellius the emperor, and another opponent named Otho would bribe the Praetorian Guard to kill Galba, and would be proclaimed emperor by the Senate. Otho hoped to make peace with Vitellius, who had rebelled against the now dead Emperor Galba. This was impossible, however, and the two would meet in battle at Bedriacum in April. Otho would be defeated, either dying in battle or committing suicide. Vitellius would be next to be declared emperor. However, he proved to be extremely violent, killing large numbers of his enemies and rivals as Rome fell into massive debt. However, the civil war would continue as the legions of the eastern provinces who had been fighting in Judea declared Vespasian emperor. Vitellius had made many enemies, and Vespasian was also able to turn the Danube legions to his side. In October of 69 AD, Vespasian's forces would defeat Vitellius, ironically at Bedriacum, the same place he had previously defeated Otho. By the end of the year, Vespasian's forces assaulted Rome, catching Vitellius as they tried to escape and executing him. The new Flavian dynasty would rise under Vespasian, who had now become master of Rome. The year of the four emperors was finally over, and for the time being, the civil wars that had ravaged Rome for over a century had come to a close. Stability was brought back to the Roman Empire after a year of turmoil and chaos, and for over the next 100 years, Rome would reach a state of relative internal peace and stability until the death of Commodus in 192 would bring the next round of internal struggle and civil war.